Last week was a rough week for our kickers. We had 10 kickers finish with less than 5 points in the week. First time it's happened since week 3. No excuse, though. Bad streamers are not in week 10. We got to flush it. We got to move on to week 11. I'm going to help you out with kicker rankings streamers right now. Let's get into it. All right. What's going on, folks? Welcome back. My name is Michael Hoff. This is the FF Face Off, part of the Face Off Sports Network. And yeah, we're giving you our kicker rankings, tiers, the streamers, everything in between. If you have any questions, fire them into the comments. I take pride in answering. This video came a little bit later than it usually does, but I was feeling ill. I wasn't hiding because I got to tell you, there is no running, there is no hiding from the week 10 streamers. Listen, I don't shy away from nothing. If I get picks right, I get them right. If I get them wrong, I'll lean into it with you because no one's perfect. That's what people got to remember when they do this kind of content. Um, Cairo Santos, he scored 11 points in week 9, but he only had 6 last week, so that did not pan out. And the frustrating thing about Cairo Santos was that a lot of people had said that they were worried about the wind. It turned out the wind wasn't even a problem. He had just one attempt for the first time since week 3. So it's hard to produce for fantasy there, but sometimes as much as you crunch numbers, it just doesn't happen. Be that as it may, we move on. The next one, Chad Ryland. It was even worse for him. He didn't have a single field goal attempt, scoring just 2 points. That matchup was there. Just what we didn't realize was that the Seahawks were going to boat race the Arizona Cardinals. And then last but not least, Brandon McManus had to suffer through that game just like the rest of us. Um, he only had one extra point attempt. So that's pretty brutal as well. So we're going to regroup here. We're going to give you 3 streamers that are rostered in less than 35% of leagues. We're going to help you win this week. So I will say we did have some nice kickers ranked inside the top 12 that finished in the top 12. Cameron Dicker, the kicker, always produces, so we did have that going for us. But whatever, we're not going to blow smoke up your ass. We're going to give you the kickers streamers this week. I will say this week we do have the Colts and the Saints on bye, so Michael Bagley is on bye. That's the big one that everybody's missing. I would tell you that if you're rostering him, you're not losing much by dropping him. You'll be okay. So be that as it may, I want to get into why do kickers matter? I love to talk about that. It's always one of my favorite things because I like to provide you a bit of perspective as to the points that are being scored at the kicking position and why it shouldn't be something that you should just scoff at and say kickers are dumb. If they're in your league, they matter. So last week, Jason Myers scored 14 points for the Seattle Seahawks. I mentioned Ryland getting boat raced. Jason Myers was on the opposite end of that, having a good old time on Sunday, and he scored 14 points. That was more in half-point formats than Christian McCaffrey and Stephon Diggs scored. So that sounds serious, especially when you're talking about a Christian McCaffrey. But whatever. Let's get into this. Again, this is going to be our streamers for the week. This is consisting of players rostered in less than 35% of leagues. And I got to be honest, this first kicker, he's in our thumbnail. And to be quite honest, I didn't expect him to be available in less than 35% of leagues, but he meets the threshold. He's right there at 34%. It's Cam Little of the Jacksonville Jaguars going up against the Los Angeles Chargers, rostered in 34% of leagues after scoring a combined 2 points in weeks 6 and 7. Little came back strong after the Jaguars bye. Over the last 2 weeks, Little has scored 14. And I think it's kind of important to give folks their flowers. I was asked by some people, hey, why wouldn't you start Little against the Texans indoors? Texans weren't giving up any points. Little came in and blew the doors open, scored a ton of points, even though the Jaguars wound up losing that game. The Texans at the time, prior to that game, were allowing just 3.5 points per kickers to kickers. So needless to say, humble pie in that spot, but we're going to lean back in again. Right now, they're playing the Chargers at home in Jacksonville, and currently, you're going to notice if you look at this, there's a lot of ugly outdoor games this weekend. This Jacksonville Jaguar game is not one of those games. Currently slated to be 80 degrees and sunny outside. Doesn't look like any kind of rain, doesn't look like any kind of wind of any significance. The Chargers ended this week 11th in points allowed to the kicking position. So beyond that, I mean, the insurance policy is that they're also one of just two teams to allow fewer than 6 points to an opposing kicker, um, that have yet to allow it. I'm sorry. So you look at the league now, and there's a lot of teams that are allowing a lot of points, and the Chargers are one of them. The Chargers, again, have not had a week of allowing less than 6 points to the kicking position. So we love to see that. So I'm leaning in on this Cam Little spot here, especially if you obviously it's well documented between the preseason, between a couple weeks ago when Little had that huge kick. We know that if you're getting points for kicks that are in distance, Little's the guy you want. You know, the Chargers, they've also been allowing more field goal attempts on the road than at home. Currently, on the road, they're allowing 2.6 field goal attempts as opposed to 1.8 when they are at home. So Cam Little, sign me up. Let's do it. Let's go from there. Let's go to the big man. Let's go to Mr. Harrison Mevis of the LA Rams, rostered in just 2% of leagues, going up against the Seattle Seahawks. He will be at home. Everybody's very excited about him. But here's the deal. People wanted to play him last week. If you played him, I mean, you got 6 points out of them, but they were all extra points. There was no field goal attempts, but that was against the 49ers defense that woke up and decided to recreate their performance that they had when they were playing the Houston Texans, be complete Swiss cheese. So Memphis really didn't have a chance to kick a field goal. I do think that going up against the Seattle Seahawks, a tougher defense, less injuries on the defense, I do think this is an opportunity for Mevis and the Rams to be in a position to kick more field goals than they might like, which benefits us if we're rostering Mevis. So I do like Mevis in this spot, obviously replacing Joshua Carty. Um, you know, the Seahawks aren't the easiest, but it's also one of those like rubber meets the road kind of things because the Rams offense, if you've seen Matthew Stafford, he's thrown himself into the MVP conversation, going from the preseason when we couldn't even find him, didn't even know if he was alive, to now he's an MVP candidate. So I do think that despite how strong the Seahawks defense is, we're still going to be put in a position with the Rams where they're going to get some field position and then they can kick some field goals. So, and again, and if you take any solace in anything with the Seahawks defense being tough, we just talked about it with Cam Little. The Texans defense caved in last week. So, and also, there was a 4-game stretch earlier this year with the Seahawks when they did allow an average of 10 points per game. So they're not impenetrable. They can be had. So I like Harrison Mevis. He's not at the top of my rankings, but the top of my rankings are a lot of kickers that are rostered in over 35% of the league. So be that as it may, the Rams are on the road. They're on a roll. I'm sorry, and I think that the Seahawks can take it. The Seahawks can be had here in this spot. So, give me Harrison Mevis to put up some field goals and some extra points. I like this coming out of this week, and I feel like he's going to jump up a lot higher than 2% because people are excited about Harrison Mevis. Next, we'll go into another kicker that I was surprised. I mentioned earlier, Cam Little rostered in 34% of leagues. This guy, I was surprised at how few leagues he was rostered in. I thought he was going to be well above 35. Then I realized he was coming off the bye, but still, Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals enters this matchup here, going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, rostered in only 23% of leagues. That's at the Steelers. So really, this is kind of the deal here. This is what we're looking at. That we have winds of up to 20 miles an hour. And I know a lot of people were worried about that with Santos last week, but again, the wind didn't bother Santos. It was the matter of opportunities. But that's where I think things differ here between Santos last week and McPherson this week. I think McPherson's going to get a lot of opportunities in this matchup against the Steelers. This is probably going to be a very high scoring affair. In McPherson's last matchup against the Steelers, he did score 15 points. What's also interesting, though, is doing some digging on McPherson. The best thing for him for fantasy football purposes was when Joe Flacco took over as the starting quarterback of the Bengals. If you take a look at what are we looking at here? If we take a look at the games in which Joe Flacco has started, McPherson's averaged 9 points. If you want to go to earlier in the year, with Joe Burrow, with Browning, before the Browns were dumb enough to trade Joe Flacco to the Cincinnati Bengals. He went from averaging 9 points over these last few weeks to just 5 points. So the changing quarterback has helped Evan McPherson immensely. It shows in that last game against the Steelers. It's showing right there in the points I'm showing you. So speaking of recent stretches too, over the last 5 weeks, the Steelers are allowing 13 points to kicker. So how do we not like that? So those are our 3 streamers. I love all 3 of them. I think all 3 of them are gonna produce. All 3 of them are in my top 12. Again, I posted my rankings earlier in the week on X. You can follow me at the FF Realist. They've been updated since then, so I initially didn't have Evan McPherson as a streamer, but now I do, and I'm happy to have him. Let's get into the rankings. Let's roll into tier 1, and before we get into tier 1, I'll tell you guys, if you have any questions, fire them into the chat. I answer them all, even if it's a rest of season question, playoff question. I will answer everything. Tier 1, we're going to get into the number 1 ranked kicker. And yes, he's coming off a bye. And it's Mr. Brandon Aubrey of the Dallas Cowboys at the Las Vegas Raiders on Monday Night Football. While Chase McLaughlin's ownership dropped by 33% when he was on bye. And if you remember last week, I had suggested that some of you go ahead and try and pick up Brandon Aubrey if he's available. Really didn't compute because he's rostered 96% of the league. So a lot of people held the line and didn't drop him. I'm going to take a sip of water in a minute. So he's not available in your leagues right now, but if you have him, you're putting him back out there. He's right back to where he belongs in tier 1. It's a cozy indoor game against the Raiders, who are allowing 9.8 points to kickers on a per game basis. So we love to see that. Also, just another little glimpse into the future. Because again, I get a ton of questions about rest of season. What are we doing? Aubrey has the 7th easiest schedule in terms of kickers rest of the way going into the fantasy playoffs. I exclude week 18 from that because if you're in a league that has a week 18 championship, if you're the commissioner of that, you need to change that. And if you're not the commissioner, you need to get a petition going and get that changed. So we exclude week 18 here in my part. So that's how we roll. So anyway, we got Brandon Aubrey being the number 1 kicker on the week. The number 2 kicker on the week was ranked our number 1 kicker last week. And it's Cameron Dicker, the kicker, going up against the Chargers in Jacksonville. Beautiful matchup. Dicker's been on absolute heater. On the year, Dicker, the kicker, has 5 games with 10 or more points. 4 of those games have come in the last 5 weeks. I apologize. During that time, he's averaged 12 points per game. So not too surprised when we see that he's got 4 out of 5 with 10 plus points. But the Jaguars are allowing the 2nd fewest points to the position. But again, this is one of those things where we're at during the point of the season where we're worried about outdoor matchups, and then we look at some of these matchups that are in better weather or indoors, and it might be a kicker who puts up points, but he's going against a tough matchup. We got to lean into this at some point. So I think you got to weigh the options of can Cameron Dicker, the kicker, prevail over a defense that isn't allowing a ton of points to kickers. And with the Chargers offense, with the way that they trust Dicker, the kicker, to go out there, I'm in on it. So I'll take him in this matchup. Good weather conditions. I will ride through this tough matchup. So when we get to the last kicker here in tier 1, and this one might be a bit of a surprise, but it's going to be Mr. Will Reichert of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I have 2 things to address to you guys here before we move any further because I was called out online and so on and so forth. So one thing I do want to say is I wanted to make him a streamer, but he was rostered in 40% of leagues. That does not meet our 35% threshold. Now, what I do want to address, I screwed up, guys. I'm doing a walk of shame. If you watched last week's show, some people called me out. I had stated that Will Reichert and the Minnesota Vikings were going to be on the road last week. That was not the case. They were at home. I screwed up. That's my bad. It shouldn't happen, but I like to be accountable. So now that I got that out of the way, I do like Will Reichert this week. So bad screw up on my end, but Reichert went on to score 7 points last week, but in his last 4 games, he's averaged 11 points. So we'd love to see that. And then also in terms of points allowed, the Bears are towards the bottom half of the league in points allowed. But that said, 2 out of the last 3 games, they've allowed at least 10 points. So we like to see that. That's a little more promising. So that leads you to believe that while they might not have been allowing a lot of points earlier in the year, they are allowing them now. So we will take that opportunity as it comes to us. Let's get into tier two. Tier two is going to be Cairo Santos here. And listen, the Bears are at the Vikings. I literally just mentioned that, talking about Will Reichert. Um, while the concern was the wind, again, I mentioned all this. Just didn't get the opportunities. I think he's going to get the opportunities this week. The Bears are still averaging, even with last week, they're still averaging the second most field goal attempts on a per game basis this year with 2.7. And the Vikings have allowed 14 or more points in 2 out of the last 3 weeks. So we'll take that chance, and we're going to put in Santos again, ride with Santos again. I got a good feeling about him. I even like him over Eddie Pinheiro this week. I've been getting a lot of questions about that. So Santos is a good play. I'm leaning in again. So Santos is my 4th ranked kicker. My 5th ranked kicker in tier 2 is Cam Little. Again, you can go back to the streamers portion of this. I will timestamp it. You'll be able to go back and watch it. Number 6 on the week in tier 2, closing out tier 2. I just referenced the man, and it's Mr. Eddie Pinheiro of the San Francisco 49ers. And this is the one that I think is interesting because people were sky high on Eddie Pinheiro since he joined the 49ers in week 2. It makes me think back to before the Texans game where I thought Eddie Pinheiro could break the Texans. Well, that did not happen. Not only did that not happen, in 2 out of the last 3 weeks, Eddie Pinheiro has a 0 field goal attempts in 2 out of the last 3 weeks. That's terrible. That's not what we want to see. So while I totally get that people are scared, I'm in enough leagues where I'm still going to put him out there. Let's not forget that even with this bad stretch, Eddie Pinheiro is still the 7th best kicker in fantasy football. And now Pinheiro is going up against an Arizona Cardinals team that is allowing the 8th most points to the position. So also, when Pinheiro played against the Cardinals in week 3, that was his second game as a member of the 49ers, he scored 13 points. Of course, had that dramatic celebration where he was talking shit to the Cardinals. So as a 49er fan, we love to see that. But it would be his first of that, by the way, was his first of 5 games where he scored 10 or more points. So that being in week 3. So fire up Eddie Pinheiro. Again, I have him ranked safe, but it's only because I love other options more. It's got less to do with me being concerned. Let's get into tier 3 here. And tier 3 is going to start off with Mr. Chris Boswell as the 7th ranked kicker. As mentioned earlier, actually, I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of wind conditions. There's wind conditions in both Chris Boswell and McPherson's game because they're playing each other 20 miles per hour. Again, McPherson is going to be my 9th ranked kicker. You can go back to the streamers part of this. I will put the timestamps in there, but Chris Boswell, I like here. If not for a 3-point outing back in week 3, Boswell would be one of just a few kickers to be averaging 10 points on a per game basis. Even with that dud of a week back in week 3, Boswell is still averaging 9.6 points on a per game basis. And in his matchup earlier against the Bengals, he scored 7 points. So, and that was sandwiched between 2 weeks in which he scored a combined 32 points. So, point being is Boswell has the firepower to be able to overcome defenses and so on and so forth. The only thing I'll say here for both Boswell and McPherson, while I'm confident in both of them, they're not slipping in these ranks much at all. They might flip-flop each other, but they're both going to be in this tier 3 here. Yeah, don't worry about the weather. The points are going to happen in this game. It's going to be a barn burner. It's going to be one of the higher scoring games in the week. Bengals at the Steelers, book it. Good times. The other kicker that is in here in tier 3 is going to be Chase McLaughlin. And I'll tell you this, Chase McLaughlin is a guy, like I just mentioned, we could see some shift in the rankings between now and Sunday. I could see Chase falling back, back a little bit further. Right now he's at 8. He could slip to 9, but he's at the Buffalo Bills. And this doesn't have as much to do with him, but Sunday there's expected to be a combination of rain and snow with winds exceeding 20 miles per hour. While the snow wound up slowing down in the Bears game with Cairo Santos early on, the snow was coming down and the wind was there. And if you remember that first first drive or so, they chose to not go for it, go for the kick on fourth down. So they tried to go for it because they didn't want to deal with the wind. I fear that might be something that happens to Chase McLaughlin here, which is why I have him ranked where I do. I will tell you guys, I still love him rest of the season. This is more like a PSA here telling you to not panic rest of the season. But if you're somebody who wants to go ahead and pivot to another kicker on this list that's a little higher, I don't mind it. I don't judge it. I think you can roll into it. So Chase McLaughlin is he's sitting there as the 8th ranked kicker. I say 8 or 9 because literally it's a coin flip between him and McPherson right now. So let's get into let's round third, head for home here, tier 4. And I mentioned him already, but the big man, Harrison Mevis in tier 4, our 10th ranked kicker on the week. You can go back to the streamers part of this show and check that out. But he's number 10. Number 11 is going to be Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks at the Rams. Myers to me has flown under the radar long enough, and I'm a culprit of that just as much as you guys. The Seahawks kicker is the second best kicker in fantasy football right now. And hasn't, I'm going to get my words out here. He's scored 7 points, less than 7 points, just once this year. There I go. I did it. Good thing I wasn't on camera for that because that was embarrassing. He's only scored less than 7 points once this year. There it is. So I like the potential here. I like how consistent he's been. I do expect points in this game as well. Again, this game is going to be in LA, so it will be nice weather. We won't have to worry about any wind or any inclement weather. So Jason Myers is a guy I could see rise too in these ranks, but love him too. If you have him, don't panic that he's number 11 here. I almost sneezed. Feel free to fire away. Number 12, as we round out these rankings, is going to be Mr. Snoopaloop, Mr. Tyler Loop. This is going to be a Baltimore Ravens matchup here. And this is kind of the deal here. This is the only thing. He's the 10th best kicker in fantasy football right now, our 12th ranked kicker on the week. This past week, Loop scored 13 points, which was tied for the second most points in the week. The reason why I have him back this far is the forecast. And we're entering that type of season where it's all about the weather. What's going on with the weather? What's the wind like here? What's the wind like there? Especially when we're talking about some of these North matchups. So while Loop could still have points, I would temper your expectations a little bit as to the points that do come out of this matchup. People always tend to ask me this. I did want to give 2 names here. People always say, what about so-and-so? What about so-and-so? And they tend to be like 13 or 14. So if you're a Harrison Butker or a Jake Bates guy, they are at 13, 14. If you decide you want to use one of them over Tyler Loop, given the forecast, I don't mind it at all. Not against it. Heck, I'd probably support it. Tyler Loop is somebody who could slip outside my top 12 between now and the time Toe meets ball on Sunday. But all that being said, that's going to do it for today, folks. I apologize for the show being so late. I apologize for talking so fast, but I need to eat dinner, so I got to go eat some chili right now. But I hope this video helped. Most importantly, if you have any questions or comments, fire them into the chat. I will help you guys out. Until next time, stay thirsty, be kind to one another. We'll catch you on the flip side. Cheers.